ドクターケープの特 A 級対策、台湾と香港、台湾の歴史。はい、本日のお題はこの2本です。この2つのエッセイを読むと大体台湾のことはもう全部ざっくりとしたっていうか、重要なところが全部押さえれるので、ぜひご覧ください。はい、今回のエッセイは国連円形の予想問題というよりも台湾と香港の違いをしっかりつかみたいという方におすすめです。私もこれ読んでなるほどなというすごい納得しましたね。はい、今回384単語で、4章に分かれてます。で、第2章と第3章がちょっと長かったので2つのスライドに分けてます。1、民族統一したい中国。2-1、香港は主権国家ではなかった。2-2、香港トップはずっと外部。3-1、台湾は事実上の国家を形成。3-2、外国の支援もバッチリ。4、台湾にはそこまでしない。台湾はとっても香港に似て民主化が進んでますから、中国にとっては何とかしたい存在。また台湾も香港みたいな目に遭っちゃうんじゃないかと心配になりますね。
Taiwan and Hong Kong share similar institutional characteristics, such as market-based economic systems with well-embedded liberal norms of democracy and the freedom of expression. For mainland China, they are extraterritorial entities whose autonomous, independent political life ought to be normalized. The recent and ongoing series of violent confrontations in Hong Kong may recur in Taiwan, possibly in a scaled-up, warlike fashion. After all, Hong Kong and Taiwan are major targets of China's irredentist drive.
はい、ドクターケープの所見では台湾は大丈夫だよということでちょっとホッとしました。で、その理由ですね。はい、これ一つ目です。香港は主権国家ではない。なのでやられちゃったということですね。
My perspective, however, is that Taiwan is not likely to be victimized in the same fashion as Hong Kong has been, for a few reasons. Let me highlight first the Hong Kong case. The historic city-state was always a commercial enclave within the British Empire, and has never grown into a sovereign state, as seen in Singapore. Its local administration has not developed anything for public security, beyond policing public order and commercial transactions.
はい、主権国家ではないということはトップはずっと香港の人じゃない。これ大きいですよね。
In fact, Hong Kong's top administrator has been a representative of the external authorities, whether British before 1997 or Chinese thereafter. Recent Hong Kong's street protesters, who are scarcely armed, are fighting against the local top administrator and the external encroaching forces. These activists have rallied for international support. While some grassroots-level support, through social media, has been forthcoming, it has been rather limited.
はい、一方台湾はどうかというと Chinese Civil War の後、事実上の国家を形成している。これはもう決定的に違います。
On the other hand, Taiwan has formed its own de facto statehood after the end of the Chinese Civil War. Meanwhile, the local commitment to irredentism, i.e., taking over the mainland, has been steadily weakened, and the Taiwanese political leaders have begun to stress their island's identity clearly separated from the mainland. The incumbent president, who is committed to protect Taiwan's statehood, has recently endeavored to build a formidable national defense system.
はい、しかも台湾は上手に諸外国の援助というか支援を受ける体制をうまいこと作ったということですね。
In contrast to Hong Kong, Taiwan has also been far more successful in mobilizing external support, including the supply of advanced military hardware and training. Taiwan is rallying for a new containment alliance against the mainland, with like-minded countries such as Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, India, the US, and the like.
中国の香港への仕打ちは国際的にもかなりの批判ですよね、浴びてました。で、そんな中それも認識しているので中国は台湾にはそこまでしないだろうということですね。
Beijing has witnessed its heavy-handed acts of depressing dissenting views in Hong Kong, have created a great deal of international criticisms. China would not easily repeat similar acts toward Taiwan, given that they would be surely backfired, not merely from Taiwan, but from many parts of the international community.
はい、続きまして台湾の歴史です。主に諸外国との関係にフォーカスしながら、ドクターケープまとめてくださいました。ものすごい作業ですね。すっきりまとまっててとってもわかりやすいです。早速見ていきましょう。まず最初は日本の植民地時代、1895年から始まります。
Taiwan was Japanese colony for 50 years until the end of World War II, 1895 to 1945. When the Japanese colonial administrators arrived in Taiwan, they gave local inhabitants 2 years to choose whether to accept their new status as Japanese subjects or leave Taiwan. During the early colonial period, say, the first few decades, the post of Governor General of Taiwan was held by a military general in order to control the insurgency.
はい、当時は日本のその軍事活動にかなりの台湾人が駆り出されました。さらにその日本の文化とか、習慣とか言語というものも、教育を受けさせたということですね。
In 1937, the Japanese government reversed the banning of Taiwanese serving the military of Imperial Japan, as there was an increasing need of, most of all, interpreters and translators for conducting military operations in China. And many Taiwanese volunteers were given training courses. Towards the end of the Japanese colonial period, school children and a significant number of local bureaucrats and workers were obliged to learn Japanese and to immerse themselves in Japanese customs.
はい、第二次世界大戦後、日本は台湾を中国に返還します。この時に返還したのが The Republic of China、いわゆる Nationalist Government ですね。
Upon its surrender in World War II in 1945, Japan returned Taiwan to China, the Republic of China, Nationalist government. During China's Civil War period, 1945 to 1949, Taiwan nominally remained as one of the provinces of the Republic of China. Before long, the mainland fighting spread into Taiwan as Nationalist Party supporters began to retreat to the island as a haven of last resort, just as many businessmen fled to Hong Kong.
はい、この The Nationalist Government が結構強めに台湾の人たちを制圧というのかな。はい、2万人近くも殺されたそうですね。で、さらに、中国のその本土ですね。本土をなんとか自分たちの手中に収めようと必死で頑張ってたようです。
In the process of managing Taiwan, many mainlanders acted as if they were an occupying power rather than liberators, clamping down further on local dissidents. In May 1947, more than 10,000 troops were sent to Taiwan to prepare for the nationalist government to establish itself there. Reportedly, nearly 20,000 Taiwanese, including many from the island's social and intellectual elite, had been killed by the end of the month. The nationalist government, which was re-established in 1949 in Taiwan, remained committed to the irredentist task of retaking the mainland from the communist rebels and bandits.
はい、ここでは台湾と北京がバチバチと火花を散らしてます。当時 The Korean War の関係でそこまでその台湾にガーッといけない中、アメリカの介入も気になりつつというところでしょうか。とはいえアメリカの方は台湾が中国を牛耳るのは無理だとあらかじめ分かってたようです。
The nationalist leaders, together with their supporters, raised Taiwan's population by more than 2 million, from 6 million to 8 million. Against the nationalists' self-claim as China's true representative, Beijing was eager to chase these runaway nationalists out of the island. The mainlanders' hot pursuit, however, could not be materialized due to their heavy involvement in the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The mainlanders were also aware of U.S. intervention, i.e., the possible mobilization of the 7th Fleet to the Taiwan Strait. But the U.S. made it clear soon that the country was unwilling to assist Taiwan in the latter's adventuristic irredentism. In its view, any attempt of the nationalists to take over the mainland would doom to fail.
台湾が中国を牛耳るのは無理と分かっているとはいえ、やはりこのコミュニズムに対して何か手を打ちたいということで、1954年ですね、Mutual Defense Treaty を結びます。
In December 1954, the U.S. and Taiwan signed the Mutual Defense Treaty, which came into force in March 1955. Clearly, Washington was willing to let Taiwan play a key role in the fight against Asian communism. Meanwhile, Beijing attempted twice, first, 1954 to 1955, second, 1957 to 1958, to attack Taiwan's isle outposts of Quemoy and Matsu, a few miles offshore from the coast of the mainland. But it failed in both when the U.S. threatened to use nuclear weapons in defiance of Taiwan.
1960年代は若干ちょっとその火花が収まります。収まるというか、どちらもそれぞれドメスティックマターズに追われてたんですね。
During the 1960s, the cross-strait relationship was rather quiet, as both sides of the strait were busy, dealing with domestic matters. In Taiwan, Nationalist Party leaders, mainlanders, tried to mitigate the friction with the local Taiwanese. In the mainland, Communist leaders were occupied with the political campaign of the Cultural Revolution.
はい、そして運命の1971年、国連総会の27585決議ですね。
Taipei retained the China seat in the UN as the sole legitimate government of the country, even though there were attempts by states friendly to Beijing to move resolutions in the UN General Assembly shifting the China seat to Beijing. In October 1971, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 2758 with an unexpected majority support for Beijing in the UN. The vote recognized the People's Republic of China, PRC, as the representative of all China, and designated Taiwan as Taiwan, province of China. The U.S. argued in vain that the UN should not be required to take a position between the mainland and Taiwan, and that at least provision should be made to ensure that Taiwan should not be deprived of its representation.
はい、そしてさらに追い打ちをかけるように1979年 US Defense Treaty も終わっちゃいます。
On December 16, 1978, U.S. President Jimmy Carter announced that the U.S. would sever its official relationship with Taiwan as of January 1, 1979. One major implication of this was the termination of the U.S. Defense Treaty with Taiwan, withdrawing its military personnel and pledging to end military assistance to the island. This was the most serious challenge to the Taiwan government since its loss of the UN membership in 1971.
はい、しょんぼりしてた台湾に対して1979年 The Taiwan Relations Act、 これによって武器だけは確保しましょう、売り続けましょうということになりました。
But in April 1979, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act that reasserted the U.S. interest in the future of Taiwan, pledged to continue to sell it sufficient arms to maintain its defenses, guaranteed U.S. support if it were attacked, including by China, and established a quasi-state relations with Taiwan except in protocol terms. In 1982, China and Reagan agreed to communique limiting arms sales to Taiwan. But once again, the U.S. used legalistic arguments to mitigate its impact, and arms sales continued, although at a reduced level.
1989年天安門事件の時、台湾はその台湾の中でメディアで放送されないようにかなり厳しく規制をしました。
Attempting to maintain good relations with the mainland, Taiwan avoided any criticism of the Tiananmen Square incident, and its media was largely barred from reporting on it.
1992年、中国と台湾は One China Principle をアクセプトします。ただし、どちらがリーダーかについては disagree のままだったということです。
While much of this structure remains in place, Taiwan President Lee Teng-hui in 1991 unofficially abandoned the government's claim of sovereignty over mainland China, stating that they do not dispute the fact that the communists control mainland China. In 1992, Taiwan and the mainland accepted the One China principle, meaning that there was only one sovereign state, encompassing both of them. They disagreed about which side was its legitimate government. The One China principle faces opposition from supporters of the Taiwan independence movement pushing the Republic of Taiwan, and cultivating a separate identity, apart from China.
中国はミサイルテストを2回やりました。これは台湾をちょっと脅すというか威嚇するようなニュアンスが込められてたんでしょうか。
The mainland conducted a series of missile tests in 1995 and 1996. The first set of missiles fired in mid to late 1995 was allegedly intended to send a strong message to Taiwan under Li Tanghui, who had been seen as moving its foreign policy away from one China policy. The second set of missiles was fired in early 1996, allegedly intended to intimidate the Taiwanese electorate in the run-up to the 1996 presidential election.
2000年と2004年は2回とも DPP から大統領が選ばれます。
The victory of Chen Shui-bian from the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, in the 2000 presidential election ended the historic monopoly of the Nationalist Party. In August 2002, President openly indicated that the Taiwan mainland relations as one country, on each side, which led to disputation throughout Taiwan, in the mainland as well the U.S. In 2004, President Chen and his running mate were re-elected.
はい、当時の中国はもう経済絶好調だったんですね。周りの国々もいろんな恩恵を受けてました。
China's rapid economic growth, especially in the period following its membership of the WTO in 2001, and its role in pulling the East Asian region through the global financial crisis, 2007 to 2009, were a major benefit to its neighbors.
はい、続いての選挙でナショナリストの人が大統領に選ばれてから中国と台湾急接近です。急に仲良くなります。
In 2008, nationalist candidate Ma Ying-jeou ran on an election platform supporting friendlier relations with the mainland and economic reforms, and defeated the PDP candidate. Ma's election to the presidency in 2008 and re-election in 2012 showed that the recent power shift in the party politics was far from definitive. Indeed, Ma's platform of promoting a thaw in cross-strait relations was well accepted in light of the importance of the deepening economic links with the mainland. In 2010, an Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, ECFA, between Taiwan and the mainland, further opened up China's market to Taiwan, on terms very favorable to the island.
国連への加盟ももういいやと台湾言い始めます。でそれに対して中国もそれならっていう感じで WTO と WHO に入るのはありかなという流れです。
Ma pledged there would be no independence, no unification, no use of force, while stressing economic, cultural and diplomatic cooperation rather than reintegration. One immediate effect was a diplomatic truce, where Ma dropped Taiwan's campaign for entry into the UN, and instead, looked to China for support its participation in other international organizations. While China lifted its objections to Taiwan's participating with special status as a customs area in various international forums, such as the WTO and the WHO.
台湾と中国の直行便も飛ぶようになりまして、そしてついに2015年、歴史的な瞬間を迎えます。
Within months of Ma's election in 2008, direct regular flights from the mainland arrived at Taipei, and flights from several Chinese cities to 5 different Taiwan airports were also introduced. In June 2015, China lifted entry permit requirements for Taiwan residents visiting the mainland. High-level meetings increased, which eventually culminated in a historic summit between Ma Ying-jeou and Xi Jinping in Singapore in November 2015.
はい、このままめでたしめでたしではないんです。2016年、新しい大統領によりどんでん返し。
The defeat of the Nationalist Party in the 2016 presidential election brought to an end the period of prolonged détente with China under Ma. Tsai Ing-wen assumed the presidency on a policy of hardening up Taiwan's stance towards the mainland, coupled with ambiguous statements, with possible implications of future independence for Taiwan. To underline this reorientation, she made a point of visiting Japan in the run-up to the elections.
一気に台湾民主化運動の波が広がっていきます。
Since protests began in 2019, Taiwan has become a refuge for a small but growing number of pro-democracy protesters fleeing Hong Kong. Widespread sympathy and support towards the young participants in the Hong Kong protest raised tensions between Taiwan and the mainland. Beijing has accused supporters of Taiwan independence of colluding with the protesters. Tsai was re-elected for the second term in a landslide victory in 2020.
はい、この後も台湾の動き、台湾と中国ですね、動きから目が離せません。Thank you for watching. I see you soon.